Korea has been on my mind. We've touched on the developments in South Korea. We spoke earlier about the North Korean, I think it's fair to say, hoax, the North Korean soldier hoax in Kursk. Um, and I was just thinking about really the connections between the two. Maybe first let's go back to South Korea. And of course, we had the attempted coup and then the impeachment of the president, the attempt to arrest him, the prevention of that arrest by a military unit. And and then another story came out that his administration had been planning a false flag incident. They were going to attack and actually kill some high-ranking members of the government with people dressed up as North Korean soldiers. That was a story, and it just sounds so completely wild. But then, and maybe it's not true. But then later, you know, I don't know who looked into it, but it was determined that very recently an order had been placed for North Korean uniforms, and so maybe there was something to it. Strange goings on in South Korea, and we've speculated that the U.S. has been involved in some way. I don't, there's no way to know. It's hard, like I say, to imagine they didn't know what's going on. And again, the more I think about it, and it's clear that there is a growing desperation within the foreign policy elite in the West. They know that they're losing this war, and to them as elites, I think really not to their countries, but to them, it's existential. This is something that they just feel like they can't lose. And one thing they've discovered, as we've noted earlier, is they just don't have the productive capacity to keep up with Russia. But there still is a lot of military production facilities out in East Asia, in particular in South Korea. So South Korea is actually a very, very potentially a very important component of their proxy war against Russia. Um, and this president has shown himself to be just slavishly devoted to the globalist hegemonic agenda. Again, he's helped them with armaments in the past, with a great number of artillery shells that helped make possible the summer offensive of 2023. So maybe the West really is behind this. So, it's not impossible. And now just another thing, and now we have another connection. It's strange, this whole Korean connection, but many of these stories about North Korean soldiers, none of which have been verified, have been coming from South Korea. So they've been generating a lot of this propaganda. And of course, Ukraine has been too. I think yesterday, Zelensky did an interview with, what's the
Lex
guy's name?
Friedman. Lex
Lex
Friedman.
Friedman, exactly. Um, I don't find him very impressive, but he has, sometimes he gets really big name
Mhm.
people to come on his show. He interviewed Mearsheimer, I know, several months ago, and um, but on that, I actually saw parts of that interview, and in one place, they talk about the North Korean soldiers, and Zelensky says outright that there's 10 to 12,000 of them fighting. We've killed or severely wounded 3,800 of them. I don't know how he could know this and not have any evidence to show us, but he made that claim, and he said there may be another 30 to 40,000 coming in. So this is a story that just won't die. I remember when it first came up. What was it, 2, 3 months ago? I kind of wonder what's going on. Could there be something to this? But it'll probably last a couple of weeks, like most of these things, and then just fizzle. But it just keeps on going. It keeps on going. It expands. It's embellished. They're getting a lot of mileage out of it. Um, and then you see, just through repetition, I think people start to believe things. When something's just repeated again and again, it just sort of becomes real. And you even find people on the Russian side. Like I noticed Dima, the military summary channel, claimed, I looked and saw the video, it was those little dots in the snow, and I don't know how you could know those were North Koreans. Um, and then Simplicius, the thinker, said he seemed to believe in it. And he came up with a theory which has actually been echoed by some other intelligent people, is that, well, it's not like the Russians need them, but maybe the North Koreans beg to be part of this to gain combat experience. And that's not utterly impossible. I think it's unlikely. Um, but the longer it goes on, I just like to say that the less likely, in my mind, is it's true. I mean, people who aren't thinking, you hear the repetition, you think, okay, well, it must be real. But if you get this constant repetition and these constant claims, and it goes on for a long time, and you still don't see the evidence, then it becomes even less believable. Because over time, some evidence, real evidence, should come through. And
Right.
it's just the fact that there isn't, actually, the longer it goes on, I think, the less possible that it's true. And
Right. It's like saying Biden is as sharp as a tack for 3 years, and then he gets out there and speaks, and you're like, "Whoops." Yeah, no, no, it's it's funny you mentioned the North Korean story because I just saw it on BBC News as well yesterday. I try to just watch a little bit every now and then just to see what the mainstream is talking about, and they had some South Korean official on there that they were interviewing, and he just said as a statement of fact that there were, I don't know, he said 10 to 20,000 North Koreans currently fighting in Ukraine, and how that's worrying for them, and how they're in this position where they have, China and Russia, these two huge nuclear powers that are, basically oppressive and surrounding South Korea and then also North Korea as well. And it just, coming from, if you're watching it, seeing a South Korean official saying this, or somebody that I don't know his position exactly, but coming from a South Korean, it just seems so much more legitimate, like, oh, well, they're right there next to North Korea. They must know.
yeah,
But
although
just
they're
to
a long
say
ways from Kursk.
that's true.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. So what do you
Yeah.
think is the end game of this North Korean story? Why are they pushing it
Well,
forward? What's the
yeah.
West?
Yeah.
What's their
Well, they've
plan?
actually, gotten quite a bit of mileage out of it already. It was used as a justification for um, lifting the restrictions on missile strikes into pre 2014 Russia. That's one thing. And then in general, it just kind of it increases fear on the Western side among the Western public. It's not just the Russians; it's the crazy North Koreans. Are heading our way, and so I think the hope too is to just gain more popular support. Scare the masses and get them in line and supportive of your project, Ukraine. And then it's also kind of part of the narrative that you see how desperate Russia is. They're falling apart. They don't have enough of their own soldiers. They have to depend on the North Koreans because they've suffered such heavy losses. I think it feeds into that as well. So yeah, they are getting mileage out of it, and then probably I imagine the South Korean government too is they want to create this fear within their own population. Now it seems to be, I have to say, failing in South Korea. I mean, this government is very unpopular. Obviously they have support from the U.S. and from elements in the military, and that's why he's still in power and hasn't been arrested. I'm talking about President Yoon. Um, but polls show that something like 90% or even better than 90% of South Koreans want him out of there. And another government would be, I think just much more reasonable. The previous government and the likely future government will want to have good relations with Russia. I mean, the previous one did have good relations with Russia. And I think everyone's seen what a disaster the policy of the current government is. So there's really very little support for it.
You mentioned that there was this false flag story. Where did you hear about that? Where did that come from?
I heard that from Carl Jha. I guess it was a kind of a big deal within South Korean media. I haven't seen it in in any of the at any of the news outlets that I frequent. But it was Carl Jha is a reporter, a Chinese who covers East Asian politics. And he said, it came out. It was actually a blogger, who was well connected, and people were doubtful. But then physical evidence was produced that they had actually ordered these uniforms. Now, still, I don't know if that proves anything. There may have been an innocent explanation for these uniforms, but it makes you wonder.
What kind of
I don't
innocent
know.
explanation?
I don't know.
They're doing reenactments, like Civil War with the costumes.
Right.
That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Yeah, definitely sketchy. Well, do you think that we will get a lot of answers when this government goes out? Because Yoon has to leave, right? There has to be an investigation. There's so many questions coming up now.
I would think so, just because, like I say, the popular opposition to him is so strong that I think people are going to demand. And actually, Koreans are very politically engaged people. I think really, more so than a lot of East Asians, and and I think they will demand an answer. And there should be, again, the opposition party should win handily in the next elections and be able to carry forth an investigation. I would think. There probably will be stonewalling, just like this president's still in power because he obviously holds on to some important levers of power within the military, and then apparently, like, he's trying to prevent Supreme Court appointments. There's one reason, like, they can't get rid of him is that you're supposed to have, there are 9 members on the Supreme Court, like in the U.S., but there are 3 vacancies, and you need to have a certain number of, I think, 6 of the justices to approve an impeachment, and start the proceedings. And because at least 1 or 2 of the current justices were appointed by him, they're not going to get it, and they're trying to fill the other 3, have the full a full court, but he's managed to prevent that. Again, he does have his hands on some of the levers of power, so we'll see. That's really the battle right now.
So this false flag story, it's got to have to spread like wildfire through South Korea. Everybody is aware of this in South Korea?
So. Yeah. I think
so.
There's no
South Korean media is
right.
talking about it.
Right.
Well, if there's, that's just, you said that there was even a plot to kill some people within the government and have it posted.
Right. According to this blogger, and again, I guess he's not just some sort of minor figure. He's again, one of the major, it's the new media, right? So, I don't know if he's the equivalent of Joe Rogan or something, but he's a major figure within South Korea.
Yeah, I'm going to have to check some South Korean media and see what they're talking about, because that's just such
I only
a
heard
huge
it from
story.
Carl Jha, but Carl Jha, as I've found over the years, he's been very reliable. He should know. I doubt that he made this up. I mean, I can't believe that. It certainly must have happened.
Yeah, that's a huge. It's so treasonous. I can't imagine. Think about something like that. Like in our presidential election, if Trump or Biden, it was uncovered that that they were going to. Got a bunch of Russian uniforms and we're going to kill, Mitch Connell or something, and or whatever. Right. It's just it's wild, and then blame it all on the Russians.
Right.
That's a crazy story.
Right.
So if I imagine South Koreans have to be very upset or worried, at least about what's going on, and then when President Yoon gets deposed, removed from office, there has to be a big investigation. I imagine they will want answers.
Right.
Just play this hypothetical game with me. So if this false flag temper is true, if the coup itself was something that was done in collaboration with the United States within the West, and then that gets all uncovered through an investigation when Yoon gets removed from office and the new government comes into power, what would that mean for? Wouldn't that just completely sever South Korea? Be like, we're done with you, the United States. Yeah. You try to overthrow. Yeah. You try to kill our own government officials with this plot. You try to declare martial law for your own war. You're doing everything against the wishes of our own people, our own democracy. Stop meddling in our affairs. Or will they be like Germany and say, you blew up our Nord Stream pipeline? Thank you, master. Thank you for destroying our energy. We'll keep on doing whatever we want for you.
Yeah. I think that the South Koreans have a lot more backbone than the average Western European now. That they are fiercely independent and proud, and if again, I don't know that this story is true, but it's out there. If it turns out to be true, and then if it turns out that the U.S. was involved in the imposition of martial law or the attempted imposition of martial law in some significant way, I think there will be real anger and real repercussions, unlike in Germany. Now, I still think it's unlikely that the South Korean, very unlikely, I think that they would actually break relations with the U.S. But it would make those relations very frosty because they really are dependent on the U.S. for their defense. There's North Korea is a real wild card, and they're very heavily armed, and they have nuclear weapons, and I think that they do have South Korea does have legitimate defense needs, and they're unable at this point, because they've depended on the U.S. for such a long time, they really are unable to defend themselves, and they need that U.S. presence. But it would certainly strain relations and maybe put South Korea on a different course, saying, "Hey, we need to become independent." South Korea is a very prosperous society, with a very robust industrial sector, and they could, in fact, defend themselves. Like Europe, they've become dependent on the U.S., but maybe they could make the decision that, hey, let's depend on ourselves. But that would be a road, it would take years to go down that to get to that position. So I think even if they're just furious at the U.S. and decide that they do want to put distance between them and the U.S., they wouldn't, cut relations and the military relationship immediately, but they might look at it as a goal, years from now.
Right. I mean, if you're Japan or South Korea, it just seems like a bad move to rely on the United States for your defense because the U.S. power is waning while these other powers directly in your region, talking about China and Russia, are rising. It seems like if you want to address your security concerns, you need to talk to Russia and China. And I think they can be reached, but relying on the United States just means that you're going to be left hanging dry at some point. The United States can't stay there forever, and if the longer they stay, their relative power is declining day by day in relation to Russia and China. So if you had any type of foresight of these countries, you would say, okay, this isn't working out. And you can see that the amount of intervention and the meddling that the West is doing in our countries is self-destructive for us. It's not it's not helping us. That they should start talking more with Russia and China to address their security concerns. And I'm sure these two big players, they don't want to see South Korea get wiped out. They want to have good relations with these countries. You said that South Korea had great relations or good relations with Russia prior to President Yoon. So do you think that's a possibility? I mean, that's kind of where it has to go to inevitably, right. I feel like.
I think in South Korea, definitely, that if a new administration comes into power, and it will, I don't think this President Yoon can stonewall for forever. The new administration will try to patch up relations to the extent possible with Russia. I don't know exactly what the relationship right now is between South Korea and China, but I think probably again this would be a more pragmatic, sort of a South Korea first kind of government that would come in, as opposed to one that puts the hegemonic interests of the U.S. above all. That's going to end when the new administration comes in.
Right. Yeah, this whole South Korea, North Korea story it's the gift really, that keeps on giving, it just keeps on giving us new stories.
Yeah, no, it's really very
these North Koreans. I mean, in a way, what's happened for the North Koreans might be the most exciting thing that's happened since the Korean Civil War, in a way, that they've been such an isolated country for so long. It's just North Korea was just this mythical place that nobody ever goes to, that very oppressed, and it didn't even seem like it was on planet Earth. And now all of a sudden in a way it's becoming integrated into the real world again. And I think the path for the North Koreans will actually be good. You know that they're going to see,
Yeah.
more economic ties, more opening up. They won't have to worry about these sanctions. The multipolar world will allow them to live their own crazy type of way of life, but to allow some type of openings as well, so that
Yeah.
we can see. I mean, it'd be crazy if you can one day we can just you can travel to North Koreans or see a North Korean, walking through Paris one day or something like that. Just they're
Yeah.
moving around. I mean, because
Not
you said
impossible.
that they're North Koreans in Moscow. Of
Yeah.
course,
Right.
military. Not,
Again, yeah,
not.
your sister has seen 8 of them so far.
Oh, really? 8? So she's seen more now, huh?
Yeah, well, there were 4, and then again she saw 4. They could have been the same 4, so 4.
Oh,
to
okay.
say.
Okay.
That was again a couple months ago, not too long after the story first broke, and it was interesting. It just like because I remember back then the headlines in the Western media were like are there North Koreans in Moscow, it was just like, well, yeah, there are. They're all just in the metro. It shows that your reporters aren't really doing a good job. If you're writing the metro and talking to people, you know that they were there.
Right. They're not hiding. They're not
Yeah,
hiding.
right,
They
right.
stand
Yeah.
out.
Because, that was the implication in a lot of the stories. Back, they're actually dressed up as Russians and they're lurking in the shadows and said, no, it's quite open. They had the North Korean uniforms on and they were standing there in the metro train.